Hello class, my name is Cameron Vinsel and I'm doing my first craft presentation for Intro to Creative Writing, 160 to be exact. And after reading through chapters 1 through 3, there's a lot of things that stood out to me. I am new to poetry for sure, and so it's kind of overwhelming, honestly, at some points to try to pick one. But I was kind of found myself reading over emotion and emotion as material, and that's something that stood out to me even from the beginning of this class. I know when I wrote my first poem, I wrote it on a friend of mine and our football experiences, and I feel like it's easy to write about things that we're passionate about, and emotion definitely comes from those passions, and it creates material, and I think that just kind of encompasses a lot of what poetry actually is. So when we look at emotion, um, what is it? And the book kind of says it is often the inspirations which drive our creative writing are those intense but intangible and pesky experiences we call emotion. And so they're pesky, they're vibrant, and they're everywhere. And there's emotion in anything, especially writing. And I was kind of thinking from an early age, we learn to use writing for catharsis, and it's almost as like we learn to translate our intangible emotions into language and record it either for ourselves or for somebody we trust. So it's like we get those feelings out there, and it's like fifth grade when you're writing notes, your love notes to your, no, I don't know, your girlfriend, I guess. But it's like all of our lives we have focused on getting those emotions out there. And I think it's just an interesting aspect. And even in today's society with social media, there's Facebook posts, Twitter feeds of emotion and these personal emotions. And so this cathartic writing, does it help readers and writers? I think it does. It helps to pull the emotions out of yourself and place them in the context of a real life situation. You gain perspective, and you just want people to see how life changing they really are. Quite often when we pick to talk about our feelings with somebody, we just want to be heard. And I think that's where, some poems people write, they just want to be heard. And so essentially, I think the writing is helpful. It releases emotion, but unless carefully crafted, and this was new for me, it's kind of hard to make for a satisfying read. And that's something that the book talked about, which surprised me, is maybe we shouldn't get so caught up in just strictly the emotion, but instead, see my arrow, we still use those creative writing techniques, similes, metaphors. We use other things to encompass the emotion to make it a better read and not just flood it with pure emotion. Um, it doesn't mean that emotion can't make for an inspiring starting point, or you can't use it, but you need to know how to use it. Um, for example, the example I used and what the book used, Charles Dickens' novel Great Expectations. There was a character named Miss Havishams, I guess. She has a heartbreak, and with another character named Estella, she breaks Pip's heart in a deluded effort. She tries to manipulate this Estella and try to get revenge on all men and against Pip. And had she not felt that heartbreak so deeply, she would then have no motivation to act in such a way. So it's interesting how they kind of combine, and that emotion, that deep emotion, allowed her to act like this, and that fueled the story. Dickens surrounds characters, especially Miss Havisham, with symbolic images, and I think this helps the reader visually picture the emotion from the character. Um, the book says in order to adequately portray such complex emotions, Dickens surrounds the character with richly symbolic images. Um, it just helps the reader be able to picture this. Dickens was able to use his knowledge of emotions to write convincing characters, and so in turn, this made for a better flowing story with regards to emotion. It talked about how Dickens talked about how the character didn't change out of her wedding dress the day she wore that and left the altar. she lived in a haunted house. So all these things kind of cultivate into um, just using emotion to really get a feel for the character, and not maybe just from a writer per se, but to use that emotion to work with the characters. And so, kind of talking about three new things that I can do for my writing, or three things that I learned. This is, again, kind of new for me. I feel like I'm starting from square one. One thing I got away from it was don't limit yourself. I said consider more tangible aspects of the emotional experience and look to apply those creative techniques. Don't put yourself in a box almost with just using emotions, and look to just kind of partner them with other material to cultivate a better idea. So essentially, I'll try not to focus on solely emotions, that having that carry the weight of the created text. My second part was view all characters as emotional beings. This is something the textbook talked about that I thought was interesting. It's like they all have a voice. Treat them like it, I mean, characters are driven by emotion, especially within working in a plot. They all need motivation. If they weren't these emotional beings, they wouldn't have motivation to act and react in the plot. And so giving them that emotional voice, and then turning that into step three, which was surrounding characters with these images, it helps them expose the emotion of the character in tangible ways, which then depends on the reader's imagination. So it's you give them the emotional part, but using materials such as these images allows for some mystery, which makes for a great story. So I just thought it was interesting how they talked about emotion. And yes, so that is my craft presentation one. I would appreciate any comments and feedbacks. Thank you.